Hey, what's up, everybody? Big news today, and a couple fronts. And thank you, TJ, for TJ's always in here early. Okay, the two big things that we didn't know this morning that we do know now. One of which I'm not sure if it's hit headlines because it's not quite a headline, but the other one is obviously CJ Stroud, who declares for the draft. And if you were convinced that Bryce Young was definitely going number one overall and you desperately wanted a quarterback, that was going to put the Texans in a bit of a pickle, but the pickle is a little bit smaller than previous pickles. Every time I hear, now I got Digital Underground lyrics in my head. CJ Stroud is available. And it gets interesting. I think NIL might end up saving college football and college basketball, because if CJ Stroud was actually considering staying in school, yes, to win a national championship, but that decision's made a lot easier if you're also making millions of dollars in NIL. Then God bless the NIL if guys start staying in school, and they're being professional athletes, of course. They're not amateur athletes, but they're staying in school, and you got all that good old collegiate stuff going on. The questions that always come up with CJ Stroud as it pertains to Houston is, he's represented by David Mulligetta. David Mulligetta is the agent for Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun Watson, if any of you guys need to be updated on Deshaun Watson, you might be in the wrong podcast or be in the wrong YouTube channel here. But I think there's a couple of fears. One, that David Mulligetta or Nick Caserio wouldn't want to do business with David Mulligetta. I think that that's unrealistic. We've talked on our morning show with Nick Caserio about this, and a couple times actually now we've asked him about working with Mulligetta. And Caserio, who is very pragmatic about things, I think tries to separate emotion from things as much as possible, and ego and all of that. At least when I know a lot of you think that he's got a massive ego. At least when it comes to operating and getting deals done, I think very much tries to set all of the personal stuff aside. So I think that Caserio is definitely open to working with Mulligetta, because Mulligetta has a lot of really good clients, for one. And if you want to win Super Bowls, you tend to need to have at least a few really good players on your team. The other question would be, okay, does Mulligetta have anything against the Houston Texans? I think that it would be dangerous to assume that because Deshaun Watson might not like the Texans, or whoever within the Texans that he might not like, that Mulligetta would feel the same way. I think Mulligetta is an NFL agent with dozens and dozens of clients. You tend to hear a lot from your clients about how angry they are with owners or how much they hate owners. I would say that much of the time it's justified, and that not all ownership groups themselves are all the, they're not altar boys. I think that if Mulligetta is going to look at his experience with the Texans, they worked with him somewhat amicably to get his client what he wanted, and that ended up being a contract that probably won't be matched for at least another couple of years, as he was being investigated or accused of 24 counts of sexual misconduct. So I think that the business relationship is as good as it needs to be for CJ Stroud to be represented by David Mulligetta. I guess the other question would be, okay, but what about the fact that Mulligetta clients seem to just up and RUNNOFT when after they've already got a deal? Jalen Ramsey forced his way out, but that was when he was on his rookie contract. Deshaun Watson's the most egregious example, and one in which I think there were a lot of weird things going on between the Texans and their dysfunction at the time, and Deshaun Watson, and his obvious, can we call it dysfunction? Are you functional until proven dysfunctional in a court of law? I think that even if he'd done none of the things he was accused of whatsoever, he still was operating in a dysfunctional massage environment. So we can call it that at least. So CJ Stroud is in play. None of your business says Texans need to pretend to be freaking in love with Stroud and only him, so a team will trade up to draft him, and they can snatch Bryce at 2. Yeah, I think the dream scenario would be if the Texans love C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young equally, I suppose, and that's the dream scenario if they know what they're doing when it comes to drafting quarterbacks, which I don't know if anybody is actually. Look at this. Look at the San Francisco 49ers. This is what you need to know about the San Francisco 49ers. I don't know if I've seen a better complete roster put together, a more physically punishing group of dudes, and they've done that by way of John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan over several years, just assembling a hell of a roster. They seem to be able to find these guys that can play wide receiver, running back, tight end, and fullback equally as well. Like, just slot them in wherever you go. And yet those guys have not been able to find a quarterback, and maybe they stumbled into Brock Purdy. I'm not sold on Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy has a whole lot of throwing into a wide open ocean types of throws, but they're doing that, and like, they know what the hell they're doing. They know what the hell they're doing, and yet they can't get a quarterback. So that just shows you what a crapshoot it all is. If you right now have your options in as much as you can get a quarterback. You can get one of these top 2 quarterbacks. And we can talk about the other guys further on down the line as we get into the draft process. So I'm not overly in love with either Bryce or CJ. I'd be very intrigued and very excited by either of them right now. When we get to the coaching candidates a little bit later on, Shane Steichen has me intrigued, because he's worked now as an offensive coordinator with Justin Herbert his rookie year, when Justin Herbert won Rookie of the Year. Yes, and I know one of the selling points for Pep Hamilton was that he was Justin Herbert's quarterbacks coach, but Shane Steichen was the offensive coordinator. So there. Plus, I think Pep Hamilton did a good job with Davis Mills as quarterback coach. So there's that. And then Shane Steichen also is now working with Jalen Hurts and getting more out of Jalen Hurts than a lot of people thought he was going to be able to. So lots to be intrigued by there. We'll get to the candidates a little bit later on. The other development, aside from C.J. Stroud, who, by the way, if he goes number 1 or number 2 overall, is probably going to get about $47 million guaranteed, which I don't know. Was it 47? No, it's $37 million guaranteed last year for number 1 overall. So 35, 36, 37 million guaranteed. I don't know what amount of NIL money would have been worth passing that up. I mean, if you're in love with the idea of winning an international championship, if you want to win a Heisman, whatever, I would applaud that. It's hard to believe that the money doesn't factor into that decision making at all. So I don't know. I mean, it's not as simple as just saying $9 million, the prorated whatever you would have made on a $36, $37 million contract, because there's still the chance of injury. There's still the chance that your play falls off. You could get an insurance contract, but if your play falls off for any reason, or you get injured and you don't play well because of an injury, but it's not that big of an injury, and teams should take that into account, but it doesn't always work out that way. I just don't see how there's any possible way the Ohio State boosters, business people that are just paying for endorsements of products and nothing else. I don't know if they would have been able to pony up that much money. As far as the second bit of news, that Sean Payton was on with Colin Cowherd, and we'll play a bunch of the audio of this yesterday. It was a really open and frank conversation. I was impressed by Sean Payton as a coaching candidate, just because he was being so open about the process with Colin Cowherd, and which means that I'm a sucker, because this is exactly what Sean Payton should be doing, is looking as open and friendly and just as forthcoming as any head coach has ever been. And then they become a head coach and they go down a different path. I think with Sean Payton, people have asked whether he'd be open to coming to, like, whatever they want to call it, whether people are insulting us by calling us a dumpster fire or whatever else it might be. I think Sean Payton addressed a couple things that a lot of us have been saying already, which is that the Texans have a whole lot of draft capital. B, he knows the McNair family a little bit. He knows Nick Caserio a little bit. This is what he brought up with Colin Cowherd, in that he's open to working with them. He's in a position right now where he'd be idiotic to say that he wasn't open to working with anybody. But I think that a lot of the points he brings up are very valid. He talked about the trade-offs you have where, hey, some of these teams don't have the draft capital that the Texans do, but theoretically maybe they have a quarterback or they have a stronger roster, and there's just a sliding scale with what you should expect. So the Texans only winning a few games is like counterbalanced by the fact that you have a blank slate. And I think a lot of this is going to come down to how he feels about the quarterbacks. I don't know. I don't know what his appetite for risk is. I think that just like Belichick, he is in a position where a lot of people would question just how good he is because, for the vast duration of time that he has been a head coach, he had a really, really good quarterback. I think that he did a really good job of managing Drew Brees as Drew Brees got older. And there's a little bit of a general manager element to that too. Him working alongside Mickey Loomis and figuring out how to build their roster. And this is something I don't think that Bill O'Brien did as well or was even concerned with, but building a roster specifically for your quarterback and for what his strengths and weaknesses are. They bolstered the offensive line as Brees got older. They didn't put a premium on deep balls whatsoever, and they never really had, but it became more about Michael Thomas being able to win underneath and being able to take advantage of a lot of the skills that Drew Brees still did have. So I like Sean Payton when it comes to him potentially working on the roster. As Wild Thing Music points out, and this is a good point, Caserio would have to call Sean daddy, which metaphorically speaking, I'll keep that up there. So if anybody's joining, they'll know what we're talking about. That's a big question, is just exactly what is the power split going to be? And this is a big point. I can't remember if I said this last week on here or on the radio show. You got to remember that when when Nick Caserio initially flirted with the Texans and then the Texans were accused of tampering, let's just say for a moment that maybe Sean Payton, I don't want to assume it, or Sean Payton, let's assume, or if not assume, let's just hypothesize that at that point when Jack Easterby was meeting with Nick Caserio at that ring ceremony up in New England, that Nick Caserio was interested in coming to work for the Texans. I would imagine that he would go into that knowing that he's going to share some kind of power with Bill O'Brien, that they'd be somewhat on equal footing. So I don't think that he is obsessed with being the main guy. It's worked into his contract now, but that's what his agent and himself would have done. You negotiate the best contract possible, especially when he was coming, without knowing who the head coach was going to be. The question would be, though, with Bill O'Brien, I think he might have thought that would have been much more on equal footing. With Sean Payton, is he going to be an underling to Sean Payton? Is Caserio going to be subservient to Sean Payton? That's the big question. And then it becomes, okay, do the McNairs love Sean Payton more than they love Caserio? This is a whole lot of drama that today Sean Payton talked to Colin Cowherd about how they haven't talked salary yet. That comes later in the process. Hold on a second. But that comes later in the process. But that is my other big concern about Sean Payton, is that I have grown at the heating of Jim Crane to be petrified of 10-year contracts. And I would imagine that Payton at some point is either going to float that or somebody is going to try to entice him with a 10-year contract. I'm philosophically opposed to that. I thought it was idiotic when the Raiders did it with Gruden. but the Raiders also didn't have the deep pockets, I think, that the McNair family does. If the McNairs are willing to actually eat that contract midway through it, if things aren't working out, then by all means give him that contract. Because the appeal with Payton, and I'm still, DeMeco Ryans is still my favorite. We'll get to that. The appeal of Payton is that your downside is minimized. I think with any of these other candidates, all of whom are first-time head coaching candidates, there's, I think, a greater degree of risk. And I'm not saying that just because Sean Payton has had success before. Sean Payton is a guy that is just flat out going to run a tight ship. You know, that's how he operates his football team. He's got the appropriate level of control freak in him. And I can't tell you how psychologically warped some of these guys are, and it's a job requirement with the level of control that some of them want. And Peyton's got that. He's got that magical mixture of psychotic control freak that I think that you are not going to have abysmal seasons. Maybe early on you do, and then the question is just what can he do with that quarterback? There is an aspect to Drew Brees, and I don't want to make this as simple as, hey, Drew Brees is a short quarterback and he did just fine with Sean Payton. It's not that simple, but the offense that they ran with Drew Brees was so intricately balanced in terms of timing and structure, and I don't think you get that with just anybody. So Payton has been able to, I know he wasn't nominally the offensive coordinator, is Pete Carmichael Jr., but Payton's running the show offensively. He's been able to prove already that he can balance being the offensive coordinator and the head coach, or at least the offensive mastermind and the head coach. And so you don't have to question that. You don't have to question, okay, hey, is Mike Kafka really a guy that has the force of personality to be a head coach? Hey, is Steichen really the offensive mastermind in Philadelphia? He is calling plays, by the way. But these questions are just ones that you flat out don't know with those guys. You have that with Payton. But A, maybe they don't woo him properly, and B, I like DeMeco because I feel he's got those head coach attributes that go above and beyond being a defensive coach. So, Arthur, real quick, I'm going to take some questions, and then we'll get to some of the candidates. I've got some DeMeco audio. Arthur says, Seth hitting the wine at work. No, it's a Topo Chico, and I'm not sponsored by Topo Chico. That's an organically bought Seth, what the hell was that? Did you just drink out of Invincible bottle? Let's see. I'll take CJ and Sean Payton. Yeah, I think that tends to be a okay. One more about this because I think it's a negative. Why does everyone forget that Sean Payton and Loomis absolutely, positively, 100% sucked with the salary cap? Aha! It's a question, none of your business. That's the question. Did they suck with the salary cap, or were they? Were they idiots were they stupid like a fox? Were they just masterminds at manipulating it just long enough until Drew Brees finally turned to dust? I think it's a lot of the latter. I mean, because it was, remember, year after year after year, Saints, they're in trouble. What are the Saints going to do now? And I got tired of saying it. There were two things about the Saints that I got tired of saying for a long time. One was, well, they can't do this. They can't do this for much longer. They certainly can't do it for 7 more years. That's what I would have said in 2013, because it was a long time that they were massaging the cap like they did. And the other thing about the Saints that I got sick of saying about them was I remember when their defense was really, really bad, and I can remember like 2 years in a row saying, well, they can't possibly be worse than this next year because they broke records for being how bad they were. And then they went out and they were that bad. So which, if anything, maybe that's the argument against Sean Payton as a head coach, is that for a long time, he and Mickey Loomis were really good at putting together great offensive performances, but they weren't all that hot at putting out a defense until recent years. In the 1 year that they did well, they were also, I guess I should bring this up as a con, they were they were paying people to injure other football players. So, who among us hasn't sinned? But they got rid of Greg Williams. That was the important thing. Let's see. Okay, so, all right, Wild Thing Music asks, who is your favorite coach, Seth, and why? And I'm going to tell you something. This is going to mesh perfectly with something that I want to show about DeMeco Ryans, which is something that Nick Bosa said about DeMeco Ryans. He really, hold on, we'll see if we can get this. I got the right one. You guys can't hear that yet. All right, so I've been digging in and finding various little tidbits for each of these guys, and a lot of you know DeMeco Ryans as a player, but you don't really know DeMeco Ryans as a football coach. So I wanted to show you a couple bits of video of DeMeco Ryans in his current element. It was weird for me when I first started seeing him. First time I saw him in person as a coach was when the 49ers came here to scrimmage, and he slipped right into it. He's just an awesome guy. I love him so much. I'm very biased, obviously. So let's see if this works. We're going to, yeah. This is Nick Bosa talking about how much he loves DeMeco Ryans.
Just the way he is as a coach and a leader is he's the best coach I've been around. I could say that, yeah. Defensive coordinator for sure. I've had D-line coaches, but as a defensive coordinator, easily the best one I've been around.
What makes him so?
Just knowing the guys, knowing the team, obviously the scheme stuff, which I don't even deal with, but I just see what he does every week in meetings and how he addresses the young guys and us as a defense, and how hard he is on us, but how much he congratulates us and is positive at the same time. I think he just has really figured out how to perfectly push us, but not push us too hard and not give us too much credit. Just really good.
Kind of thread the needle.
Exactly, yeah. And it seems simple, but it's really not. And he's gotten better at it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, has it always been?
No, I think he's getting better, just like us as a defense.
So if you just joined it, that is Nick Bosa talking about DeMeco Ryans as his defensive coordinator. And you can almost see him there struggling a little bit with how once you start saying that somebody's your favorite coach, you start thinking about all the other coaches that you might be insulting by saying that. So I like that I think he visibly struggled in trying not to say that DeMeco Ryans was flat out the best coach he's had. I could see him thinking about Robert Saleh as he was saying DeMeco Ryans. That damn Topo Chico, it just doesn't stay down. So I think the part that he said there that really intrigued me was when he talked about how he's hard on us, but that he finds ways to communicate with the younger guys. And you juxtapose that against Bill O'Brien, who just hated rookies, which I get. There's a lot to hate about rookies. They're annoying. They're louder than they should be. They just don't respect their elders the way they did. Not back in my day. But I think that's part of today's NFL is exactly how do you communicate with younger players. He commands a certain level of respect, not just because he was a former player, but because I think he's a former player who gets players. He just understands players. The other, this little video. Okay, so this is a story that the announcer told during the San Francisco-Seattle game on Saturday, which I thought kind of spoke to DeMeco and his human touch, his understanding of player psychology. This is really cool.
Defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans says he's talked to Lenore about the fact that teams are going after him. He said, look, don't look at that as a negative. Don't take that personally. Look at it as a positive. You're going to have all these chances to make plays.
Yeah, so it's as simple as that. Like, don't look at it as a negative. Look at it as a positive. You've got a chance to make plays. And Lenore has been picked on all year. Charvarius Ward in that game didn't have as good a game against DK Metcalf as he had in the previous games. And but Lenore came up big in that game in the second half with that interception. That was one of the things that really sealed the game for them. So DeMeco, and I think Bosa saying that he got better as the game went along, or as the season's gone along, he's gotten better at learning how to communicate with players. I guess that's both a positive and a little bit of a negative, because it's a reminder that he's only been a coordinator for 1 year. I think that if you look at various guys, like Mike Vrabel was a coordinator for 1 year. Tomlin was a coordinator. I don't think, was Tomlin not a coordinator at all, or was he just a coordinator for 1 year? He hadn't draped himself in glory as a coordinator, but both those guys are kind of guys that were just it factor guys. You felt like, all right, this guy's a head coach. You just know it. And I've told you guys a story before about DeMeco Ryans. Like when I was a 10-year vet and he came in as a rookie, he was immediately one of the most impressive guys I'd ever played with. He was just a guy that I wanted to emulate. You know, I was 10 years older than him, but I wanted to emulate him. And he's like a positive mindset guy, but he's going to drive guys hard too. Some of the common questions come up with like DeMeco and his relationship with the McNairs for a couple reasons, positive and negative. Carl says, does DeMeco's familiarity with the Texans organization give him the edge over a more experienced coach like Sean Payton? DeMeco's my preferred pick. I think that it does. I think his relationship helps. I think with anything like that, though, I think it can be a hindrance too. For one, okay, does Cal McNair still kind of think of DeMeco as a player and have him in that psychological category? And then there's the other part, which I don't think is an issue, but people bring it up, and it's worth bringing up, is that DeMeco did sue the Texans for unsafe working conditions. Everybody could see those were unsafe working conditions. Did you? You played on that stuff. There were pallets of mud there by the end of the season, and they changed the field. So I think that's like a workers' comp thing more than anything. The Texans have reached out and requested the interview. So it certainly hasn't kept them from wanting to interview him at the very least. The other guy that I was going to do last Friday, but that was when I was drinking, and I decided against it because I made like 4 mental errors before I even started the thing. Because you should never drink and stream. Well, not for this type of stuff. Ejiro Eviro is a guy I'm very intrigued with. He is let me be sure we're here. He's the defensive coordinator for the Broncos. And I know what you're thinking. The Broncos suck, but their defense did not. And Ejiro Eviro, I'm going to say his whole name because it's just fun to say. He's been in the NFL for 13 years. He through the 14th game of the year, that Denver Broncos defense was just nails. Like, they were awesome. They were really kicking butt. And in the latter half of the season, they were doing it with a lot of replacements. You know, Chubb got traded halfway through the season. They had injuries mount up. They were playing with practice squad guys and street free agents. So as of December 22nd, a few days before the head coach would be fired, they were number 3 in points allowed. They were number 5 in yards allowed. The offense was dead last, 15.6 points per game at that point. So, and they weren't getting any help at all. Then that next week, that same week, that's when they got throttled by the Rams. The Rams built a 17-0 lead before the Broncos had even gained a down. Like, it was a disaster. The Broncos turned the ball over a bunch, and that skewed everything to where they're still a top 10 defense with a lot of things, but not as statistically impressive. But that's why he's still getting a lot of love for his work as a defensive coordinator in just 1 year. He's another guy that was only up for 1 year. I'm going to show you a clip of him mic'd up, and he's a guy that and I'm gonna show you. I'll be able to show you like very early in this clip why he was. I got intrigued by him. Here we go.
Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Oh, I love that communication. Anticipate it. That's why you get it.
It's Dom Capers. Do you see that? It's Dom. Okay, this is why I was excited when I saw Dom, because when I was watching Eviro in the press conferences and I was watching some of his interactions with players, he struck me so much like Dom Capers, which is a good thing in my mind because I love Dom Capers. Somebody earlier asked who my favorite coach was. Dom Capers was one of my favorites because he was like a perfect blend of very like analytical and straightforward, but also like enough of an edge to him that you were still a little bit scared of him, like you should be. And I feel like Evero is that guy. He's just hyper focused. So they brought in Dom Capers to work with him this year because he only had 1 year of experience. They also.
Everybody on the staff feels comfortable. Okay with it. And most importantly, you feel comfortable with it. Okay. Because as you go in and you start put those ready lists together, that stuff's important. Yeah, no question. There you go. Yeah. Sometimes those guys get too fancy and they dance around. Just can use what you got. Yeah, that's right. Speed to power.
Okay, right there. So those are two separate conversations. When he says that sometimes these guys get too fancy and they dance around, I'm guessing he was talking about a corner blitz or a defensive back blitz of some sort, because all of a sudden they want to become Bruce Smith and hit a move or something, where when you're blazingly fast, especially a running back is just trying to block you, just speed to power, man. Just get there and blow somebody up. So, and that was one thing that Dom, as a defensive coordinator, as a head coach, he paid so much attention to detail, and that was one of the reasons I loved him, because I think you weren't going to be wrong for a lack of instruction and knowing what you're supposed to be doing. And Eviro gets talked about that same way. He also, selfishly, or at least just from a defensive lineman's perspective, the elements that I've seen in that defense that he's taken from Brandon Staley, which Brandon Staley got from Vic Fangio, and Vic Fangio developed with Dom Capers back in the day. A lot of their philosophies, they show up in Denver's defense, and a lot of that is due to the way they ask defensive linemen to play, and it's like a cheat code. They teach you so much. Like, as a defensive lineman, which we're typically the dumbest position, you got to understand, they're just happy when we line up in the right spot. Those guys like Vic Fangio, Dom Capers, and I think Ejiro Eviro have such a respect for the intelligence of their players, and they like getting guys, at least a good chunk of guys on their team that can handle doing more complex things. They taught me more about the game of football the first training camp I was with the Texans than I had ever really learned in my entire career before that, when it came to just diagnosing tendencies, formations, guys' stances, and I ended up getting, for the first time in my career, getting a bunch of tackles for a loss, and just being a way more productive player, because it was like a cheat code, because it was like you could read the offense and know what plays were coming, or just by virtue of what coverage was playing behind you and what the backfield formation was, they would just set you loose or allow you to freelance some. So that's the kind of guy he is. I think he's kind of an intellectual guy that is also, though, very straightforward. Patrick Surtain had perhaps his best season, and he very much credited. I've seen a couple different quotes from Surtain saying that it was all about the communication. And communication in the NFL is really, really big. It's one of the, if the communication is neglected, it gets really bad really fast on defense, and that's one thing that you spend a lot of time telling rookies is, we can't hear you. Let's see. What happened? Sound's out. Hold on. Let's see. Sound is out. Check 1 2. Check. Check 1 2. There you go. Am I back? Tell me if I can. Can you hear me now? Byron Lee says it looks like I'm making a great point. I was. That was the best point. Okay, cool. Something was loose, man. I talk with my hands too much. Thank God, only like 8 people left. I'm just touched by the loyalty, especially since I've got so many notes on all these guys, and I feel like I want to talk for an hour about Ejiro Eviro, but we have to move on. Oh, I've got a Kareem Jackson video at some point that I'll show you too. Kareem Jackson and the safeties for Denver played very well this year. I think that's when I got excited thinking about Jalen Petrie. And if you look at here, we'll add this in. Hopefully this doesn't mess it up again. But when you start watching him coach defensive backs.
That's it. Good get off right there. Good get off.
Here he's talking to defensive linemen.
That's better.
I need my safeties. There we go.
Necessarily match it. You can work your weave off the quarterback because you know you're still going to get in Kareem on the backside, right? And then you can flash back and help the nickel. There you go. Good. Like that's like perfect body position by you two right there. You know what I'm saying? Now you guys can both trigger off the ball. Like, the more the quarterback's eyes are here, the more I'm going to work with it, right? The quarterback's eyes are here. Now I'm thinking about rocking back this way. What does that mean for you? Yeah, exactly. You don't ever have to get in that body position, right? You can stay square, stay off the quarterback, because the safety and the corner are going to collect the routes off the field.
So there you go. So I would predict, looked like he was working for the linebackers there. I would say Christian Harris, 4 interceptions next year. Jalen Petrie, 17 interceptions if all goes well according to plan. I think that so Evero is a guy that I knew very little about, and that's why I wanted to spend some time on him. I think that another question with him would be, if you're going to run a 3-4, are these personnel for the Texans? Are these personnel for the Texans fit for that? I think that right now, the good players you have on the team, and I don't mean that as an insult to some of these guys that I'm not thinking about right now, but like the genuinely good and promising players are pretty scheme agnostic. They could work in, like Jalen Petrie can play in a bunch of different schemes. Derek Stingley can play. You never turn down man corner with length for any scheme, no matter who you are. And I don't care how dumb of a defensive coordinator you are. He can work in any scheme. The defensive line, it might take a little bit of rejiggering, and some of these guys now that they've worked on getting 4-3 defensive ends. I mean, like Jerry Hughes, you can always use a Jerry Hughes, especially he'll be 35 next season. If he chooses to keep playing football, I think that he works just fine, even as a situational pass rusher. Some of the interior defensive line, they might start shuffling around a little bit, but honestly, I felt that Roy Lopez and Heinisch anyway probably should be in more of a gap control scheme, and they could probably thrive and flourish in something like this. So, long story short, no, I think the scheme will be just fine. And I'm not too worried about Eviro. So very intrigued with him. He interviews tomorrow, I believe, if tomorrow is the 17th. The other big thing about Eviro, and I didn't quite fill this out as much as when I was talking about why Dom Capers was brought in as a consultant to work with Eviro, along with Bill Kolar, former Texans defensive line coach. It was because of the main 5 assistant coaches on his staff, they had a total of 7 years NFL experience. Like, it was a really young staff in terms of NFL experience. Some of those guys have been in college for a while, but there's a lot you got to learn about coaching in the NFL. It's just different. I'm not even like trying to worship the skill level or anything. The rules are different. The things that you can and can't do against these quarterbacks is different. So to work with a staff that young, I'm really impressed that he was able to do that and have the success that he did in the first year. And then as far as the 3-4 defense goes, Christian Harris I'd love Christian Harris as an inside linebacker in a 3-4. And it means less than it used to because teams are in nickels so much. Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen is the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. They have been very, very good in pretty much every category on their team, but particularly Jalen Hurts has been integrated into that offense, and I think his skill set has been used perfectly with that talented crew he has with him, but I think he's also advanced as a passer. And the thing about Shane Steichen that gets exciting, and I'm the last guy to think it's automatic that when you have a good offensive coordinator that all of a sudden, he's going to translate into being a good head coach. But he's done this now with both Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts. And he transitioned to being the full-time play caller midway through last year, I think. So with Justin Herbert, when he was Rookie of the Year and performed far better than people thought he would, and remember, he did it with a bad offensive line. That offensive line hadn't improved a whole bunch from what it's been like for the Chargers forever. So, and let's remember too, he's not coaching Justin Herbert this weekend as somebody has at Lombardi. So he's done it twice now with young quarterbacks. That intrigues me. He doesn't necessarily have like the electrifying personality that you're looking for, but neither did Andy Reid and neither did Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan would be a big one. I was watching him flip out on somebody on the sideline the other day, and not that that's what a head coach needs to do, but it was notable because I feel like his personality has changed a little bit. And I don't mean to say that shouting and screaming and being negative is what makes you a good head coach. It's just that he might not have had as much of an edge 10 years ago. He developed it along the way because you got to have some balance there when you're the head coach. Sometimes there's just a level of urgency. So with Shane Steichen, I can't stop thinking Nick Foles when I look at him because he's kind of tall and gawky and has a little bit of well, here, I'll show you so you can get to know these guys. We'll find some Shane Steichen for you. Let's see. Buddy Brady Langston says, I love Ben Johnson or Steichen to pair with Stroud or Bryce. My only worry with DeMeco is how good an offensive staff he would be able to bring with him. Yeah, that's a very fair and valid question. Let me get off of the... There we go. Very fair question, Brady. Clint Kubiak's worked with him. The thing about DeMeco is that he's always been, or for much of his career as a player and as a coach, he was on a team that had a Kubiak/Shanahan system. And that's one of the things that I would be hopeful for, that because he spent so much time practicing against that offense, talking to coaches about that offense, that he'd have a good eye for finding the right coaches or knowing who the up-and-coming guys are in that system, and B, that he'd be able to coach them up properly and be a good sounding board. Or there is also the possibility that, you do the flipperoo with what Kubiak did with Wade Phillips. Kubiak brought in an older defensive coach. Is there an older offensive coach floating around out there as an offensive coordinator that you'd be intrigued by, that has maybe recently lost a job or something? I'm not talking about Bill O'Brien. I'm not talking about Bill O'Brien, if that's what you're thinking. I 100% wasn't leading that way. I don't think Kubiak's coming back though either. Plus, yeah, people are pointing out that Mechie potentially coming back next year too. That is a big deal. Okay. Bear with me for like 20 seconds while I fumble through this trying to find the Shane Steichen. Oh, there we go. Okay, this is Shane Steichen. You don't want that one. Let's see, Shane's. This is just so you get a feel for Shane Steichen. Like, he doesn't have the most electric of personalities, which is fine. That's not the... Electric personalities aren't the only thing that you need to worry about in this life. I've got a... All right, let's try this. Is this the one? No, that one. Here we go. This is mic'd up. We'll watch a little bit of mic'd up with Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon, okay?
Stealing. Oh, my God. There it is. Bang. Good spot. God, he's sprinting back to that ball. On top. On top. On top. Check his split out. On top. On top. On top. Get it out. Atta boy. Get it out. Get it out. Get it out. You can't fix everything. Fix one thing. You know what I mean? And then it takes off pressure to the player. Like, hey, dude, like, you're one.
Okay, so this is Jonathan Gannon, by the way. We'll hit two birds with one stone. So Jonathan Gannon is the defensive coordinator for the Eagles, and he's more yoked up than, let's see if we look at, there's Shane Steichen. You see the Nick Foles? There's something about, he's kind of tall and lanky, and he got the Eagles gear on, and he speaks a little bit like Foles. I'm trying not to let that affect me.
There it is. Bang. Good spot. God, he's sprinting back to that ball. On top.
But he flat out knows what he's doing. And then you get to Jonathan Gannon, and his defense is very good. I enjoyed what he was talking about with this assistant coach here.
To the player, like, hey, dude, like, your one thing was hook seam. That's right. Your deal was hook seam. Well, you know, this wasn't good. Yeah, but my hook seam was good. Good. Then you just keep stacking those together.
Okay, so I liked that just because he was talking about focusing on one thing at a time, you know, just stacking these player improvements up instead of getting guys to try to fix their entire game just in, you know, every day bitching about everything that they're not doing right instead of figuring out about something else. Sorry, I'm not gonna read all the comments about Shane Steichen. So Shane Steichen, at first I was worried that he was going to be a little bit of a stick in the mud personality. I do think he's kind of like Ben Johnson, who we talked about last week. I think there's a goofiness about him, but that's okay. Like, nobody's as goofy as Mike McDonald, and he seems to have the respect of his players. And the flat out fact of the matter is, if you produce, then your guys are going to respect you. One other guy that I'm not going to go into right now because I spent 30 minutes, plus the game is starting soon. Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator for the Giants, I tried to find some entertaining or just interesting audio from him. And I got to tell you, this guy, he's a quarterback that went to Northwestern. And I cannot tell you how much of a Davis Mills personality he has. Just milquetoast as all get out. And I don't mean that as an insult. Everybody, we need all types out there in this world. But when it comes to my head coach, I got to have him. He's got to have some kind of juice. And with Kafka, I'm not feeling the juice. I don't see it yet. Maybe if I watch more and I watch more interaction with the players, it'll come to me. But when it's like with my quarterbacks, I want the personality of a guy that could be a pool hall hustler if he had to. You look at the Hall of Fame quarterbacks. We've talked about this on the show. If you look at the Hall of Fame quarterbacks, almost all of them have a little glint in their eye to where they could be a pool hall hustler if they wanted to. Even Steve Young, I would submit, if that's what God told him to do for whatever weird reason, he would figure out a way to do it. He's got enough of a mischievousness and a charisma about him. I get nothing of that from Kafka. The other guy, and I feel like I forgot somebody in this rundown. We did Ben Johnson last week, and Thomas Brown, who's the assistant head coach for the Rams, is he's a person of intrigue because he hasn't been a coordinator, and Sean McVay had him as his assistant head coach the last couple of years, almost as one of those it factor type of guys, I think. And it's interesting to me just because Sean McVay has been thinking about leaving coaching for the last 2 years. So I don't know if he chose him as like his head coach in waiting or not. It intrigues me. It's just there's no buzz about him. So I think the Texans might be looking at him as a guy that maybe they want to get a look at, get to know him, like find out why's this guy got so much shine on him, and go from there. So I will probably dig into the quarterbacks tomorrow, do some playoff talk. Here, I'll answer a couple questions before we go. Let's see. Do you prefer a strict DC or a more laid-back coach? It depends. I think it depends. It depends on, I only had my entire football career, I think I only had one head coach who was laid back, and that was my last year with Gary Kubiak. And there was a part of that where I was almost kind of, a lot of us that had only been with like super strict old school coaches, their first year with Kubiak, you kind of are like looking around waiting to see if it's just too good to be true. Like when you're expecting to get yelled at, you're like a shelter dog. When you come home and you're not going to accept any love from anybody because you're so frazzled from the constant abuse from your coaches that it takes a little while to really accept that Kubiak is as good a dude as he is. And as far as laid back, I think that, gosh, I never played for Wade Phillips, but he got pretty damn good results while still being an awesome dude. So I think I would have loved playing for Wade Phillips. But I also I benefited from having some hard asses as defensive coordinators too. Let's see. TJ Williams says, I really like Steichen, DeMeco, and Ben Johnson. I know, man. I'm having a hard time. I'm so happy that there are hard choices to be made this year with this coaching search. That's maybe my expectations are too meager. Maybe I've lowered the bar too much. But like every single one of these guys, except for Kafka so far, when I've watched and gotten to learn and know them, and don't get me wrong, I mean Kafka, I'm very impressed by. There's also a question though, is okay, Kafka's calling the plays, but Brian Daboll I think is pretty damn involved. And Brian Daboll, if you're talking about juice, man, Brian Daboll, he's got some juice to him. He's a guy, and I just don't feel that with Kafka, even though I'm sure he's very intelligent football wise. Let's see. Got to ask, what's Wade doing? Wade, which Wade? Is it Wade? Wade Phillips is in, I don't know which Wade you're talking about. I might just be having a brain fart right now, but Wade Phillips is coaching the XFL. He's coaching the Roughnecks. So he's a Houstonian yet again. Dead Shred 9 says 4-3 is the best way to stop the run. We need better linebackers. Can get those in free agency. I disagree that the 4-3 is the best way to stop the run. I think there is no perfect defensive scheme. Each one of them has their benefits and their drawbacks. There are a lot of 4-3s out there that are really, really bad at stopping the run, almost by design. Lovie Smith's have at times been them. There were more than just the run defense issues with Lovie Smith this year. I'm not blaming it on the scheme or anything. But yeah, I think it always comes down to the blend of the personnel and the defensive coordinator. But I will thank you all again. Please subscribe and give a thumbs up. That'd be awesome if you did that. And tell anybody else about the YouTube, because I'm really having a lot of fun with it. And every time I get on here, I'm like, shoot, I can't do a solo show. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And it ends up being really easy and fun because you guys are all super cool about it. So thank you. I genuinely appreciate it. And then there's like an awkward 4 seconds while the broadcast ends.